Jenny, if you want to take it away, please go right ahead.
Hi, guys. I hope you're enjoying what has been kind of a couple of rainy days, but unseasonably warm days here on Cape Cod. I'm super happy that you took the time to come hang out with us tonight. Welcome to live Zoom cooking with me, Jeni Wheeler. I'm super happy to have all of you. And I figured, you know what? It's fall. They actually call it Crocktober. So a lot of people like the crock pot thing in October. And funny enough, you can make the soup predominantly in a crock pot if you wanted to. It's just the timing of doing it live with you on Zoom makes that a little bit tough. However, I love fall. Fall is my favorite season. I'm a big turtleneck sweater and boots and jeans person. However, it's not cold enough for that yet, which is why I feel like I'm standing here sweating. But we're gonna get past that. We're gonna make some really tasty treats. I went a little bit in between because it's been warmer than normal. So we're taking that high quality fall ingredient, butternut squash. I love, love, love butternut squash. But I'm also mixing it up with just, something a little bit lighter, a little side salad, some crusty bread. And there's a million ways you can do this. And that's one of the things. If you pay attention to nothing else that I say, everyone's palate is different. So I gave a lot of optional or, if you want to do this, if you want to do that. And I really mean it. You can make this dish, you can make butternut squash bisque taste 100 different ways using 100 different ingredients. So I brought a whole lot of them to kind of show you, but we're not going to do all of them because then it probably wouldn't taste so good. So pick the ones that interest you the most. I did mention the idea of fresh sage. So fresh sage to me is like a divine smell. I love the smell of sage. But I found something a little bit ago that made all the difference in flavoring different types of soups and stews. And that is, I did a little bit of a brown butter. Literally, you just saute up some butter, you make it nice and brown, and I crisp sage. And what it does is it brings out the flavor of the sage. So what happens is I take it often and I crumble it, and it literally is crispy, and I crumble it on top. And to me, it adds just such a beautiful flavor. So I wanted to show you because I did that ahead of time because it's not something that everyone might do. And like I said, with this, I gave a lot of options. So let's get started with the things that are going to take the longest. Let's face it, butternut squash is kind of a pain in the neck for a lot of people to cook with, even if they're people that cook all the time. You guys have all heard me say it. I have a nerve injury in my right elbow. I don't have great grip strength anymore. It impacts my knife skills. So for me, I always am trying to find workarounds, right? So here's the easiest workaround. Buy butternut squash that's already peeled. You want something even easier than this? Places like Trader Joe's and Whole Foods and Stop and Shop, most of them have frozen butternut squash that's already cooked. So if that's easier for you, do that. The one thing I would caution you is try and get a butternut squash that is the only ingredient. If you're going to make a soup or a stew with it, if you're going to cook with it, what you don't want is to get something that already has salt, or a lot of times you'll see things like cinnamon or nutmeg. You want to make sure you check the ingredients. You want the only ingredient to be butternut squash. So what we're going to do is we're going to get the butternut squash started. We're going to grab a pan. I have a nifty little, because we're back at Pam's kitchen, Pam has all of the cool pots. So today we have a pumpkin because we're approaching Halloween. So what I'm going to do is I got it started a little bit. But what I want you to do is I want you to open up your butternut squash. If you have a whole butternut squash, I find it is easier to cut it, to give yourself a flat surface, cut it in the middle, and then cut the top off. And that way it's easier to peel. But butternut squash is very difficult to cut if you don't have a good knife. For me, it's difficult to cut no matter what because of the nerve injury. So I always used to use regular butternut squash, but now I use cut up chunks. So I got this started a little bit, but I'm gonna throw in a pan. We're going to put in, you're gonna put in a little bit of butter because I had already started. You're gonna put in about 2 tablespoons of butter. There's 8 tablespoons in a stick, so it's about 1/4 of a stick of butter that you're gonna put in. And then we're gonna put in the butternut squash. And we're going to give it just a little stir to get it coated with the butter. And then we're going to cover it and we're going to let it cook on medium while we prep the onions. So make sure anybody can ask any questions at any time. You can write it in the chat. And again, there's not necessarily a big right or wrong here, but we want to just get it in the pan with about 2 tablespoons of butter. And then we're going to cut the onions. Now I had somebody pre-chop it for me, so I could just show you the little bits, but honestly, what you're looking for is about maybe 1/4 cup. You want to have that nice caramelized onion feel in it. So you just want them fine diced. Again, I want to just show you about the size. So that's about what you're looking for. Perfect. Okay. So we're going to cut up about 1/4 cup. That's going to be, depending on the size of the onion, somewhere between 1/4 of a really large onion to kind of 1/2 of a normal sized onion like this big. So we're going to dice up a couple onions, and then we're going to get those into the pan. If you're cutting an onion whole, cut it in half, put the flat side down, give yourself a flat surface. It's always, always, always better for you to give yourself a flat surface to cut on. It makes it harder for the blade to shift, and that's when most people hurt themselves. If the blade slides, you're more likely to cut yourself. The other thing, and you've heard me say it before, the most dangerous tool in a kitchen is actually a dull blade, because you're much, much, much more likely to cut yourself with a dull blade than you are with a sharp blade. So once you get your onions cut, we're going to go ahead and throw them in the soup. And we're just going to get that warming up a little bit. We can mix it a couple of times. I'm going to stir it up and get the onions in, stir it up. We're going to wait a couple of minutes before we throw in the broth or the stock. I mentioned the better than bouillon. So this is one of those options. This is the only bouillon I use. It's a lower sodium, better than bouillon, vegetarian. This is a great addition. It adds some nice flavor if you're vegetarian or vegan. If you're not, the chicken broth is also a good option. If you're adding broth, you don't need to necessarily add water. When you add bouillon, you have to add water, okay? So you're gonna do, if you're doing the bouillon, we're gonna wait a couple of minutes before we add it because we wanna get the onions in, stir them up a little bit, get them to caramelize a little with the butternut squash. Because when we get that butternut squash caramelizing a little bit, it actually brings out the flavor. So before we complete the soup and puree it, I want to kind of bring out that roasted flavor a little bit. And that's what happens when you kind of have it in the butter, it caramelizes a little bit, brings out a nice sweetness. Okay, so we're gonna cook this off. We're gonna stir it a couple of times, we're gonna cook it off, maybe 10 minutes. And then we're gonna add the broth or the bouillon and the water. Now, I gave a couple of other options tonight. And one of the reasons was a lot of people have been writing in saying that they actually eat vegan. And that's fantastic. I cook for a ton of people that are vegan. In fact, most of the time, most of my family is vegan. So they're not 100%, but I would say like 95%. So one of the options we gave tonight was, let's see, where did I put them? There it is, it's hiding. Coconut milk. So coconut milk, most people think, oh my goodness, like I don't think I've ever cooked with coconut milk. Coconut milk shows up in a lot of food when you order things like Thai food, a lot of different Asian foods, a lot of Indian foods have coconut milk in them. So this is something that's an ingredient used in a lot of other places, not necessarily as standard in most traditional cooking in the United States, but it's an amazing alternative. Now, if it is, most of it is unsweetened, in which case they've taken the sugars out. So what's going to happen when you open a can of coconut milk is a lot of times it's actually, particularly if it's unsweetened and organic, it will actually have like the cream, the thick cream. You know, if you have real cream, it actually develops a layer on top. Coconut milk does the same thing. It develops this thick layer that almost looks waxy. And then when you cut through it, you actually get the thin, it almost looks like white water. So that's what coconut milk looks like. You can use coconut milk. It has a beautiful flavor. Or if you're more of a traditionalist, you can use heavy cream. Now, most people don't realize this. Heavy cream, as far as the milk family goes, it has the least amount of sugar. It is the least processed. So although it is high in fat, it actually is the least processed and has the least amount of sugar, which is why a lot of people who are bothered by milks are less bothered by heavy cream. So just a fun fact, it depends what your trade-offs are, but to be perfectly honest, I have almost no milk ever. I can tolerate heavy cream, and it's because I don't tolerate sugar well. So my body does not do well in taking sugars. So heavy cream is actually something that I can do. But like I said, vegan, an alternative is the coconut milk. And if you are not and you don't mind, then heavy cream works as well. So let's go ahead and stir our pot. You should be able to see it start to soften. And you might see a little bit of that kind of darkening around the edges, that caramelization. This pan is so heavy, I can't actually pick it up. To show you, you know where I tip it and I just realized I was like, with my arm, I can't do that with this pan. So Jim is my trusted, amazing producer that's behind the scenes here. So maybe at some point in time, we might see if you can do a little bit of a close-up. since I realized I can't tip that pan with my arm. So again, this is one of those soups that is so easy, but so satisfying. I think I mentioned the last time as well, a lot of times people will mash a soup or they'll blend it, which you definitely can do. This is called an immersion blender. It is my best friend. I even do eggs with it because I can't whisk anymore with my right arm. This is what I use. It does a beautiful job. So, but at the end, I'm going to use an immersion blender, but I'm also going to tell you, you can take parts of it and put it in a blender as well, because that'll do the same exact thing. So, okay, so that's cooking off. So we're just about 10 minutes. So we're going to give it a couple more minutes, and then we're going to go ahead and add a cup and a half of liquid. Now, again, it can be cream or it can be coconut milk. I added a can of coconut milk, and I added a little bit of the chicken broth because I wasn't as concerned about keeping it vegan for the crew that's going to be eating it here when I'm done. So, but again, that coconut milk has that thick top usually, and then it looks a little bit like coconut water, like a milky water. That heavy cream gives a beautiful texture. And a lot of times also, by the way, when we're finished, you'll see like heavy cream or a creme fraiche, and you can top it with a couple of different things. These are some of the kind of toppings that I mentioned as possibilities. I love beans. You've heard me talk about beans before. I love beans. So I brought a couple of different I mentioned to you garbanzo beans, which is chickpeas. I also brought a fava beans and chickpeas mixture. I love this mixture. To me, it's really, really tasty. So a lot of times what I'll do is I'll do a little dollop of either cream or sour cream. Some people even like a dollop of cream cheese. And I'll put some beans on top of it. And then I might dice up a little bit of cilantro. Or if I'm feeling more like really fall, I might do a little bit of curry, which I mentioned as a possibility. So curry, I don't know how many of you cook with curry regularly. Curry is one of those ingredients, again, that is thought of as kind of a more ethnic type, spice. Curry, actually, there's a ton of different types of curries. Most of the time in the United States, you say curry and people think of like the yellow curry. Curry comes in all different colors, all different heat levels, and elicits a whole abundance of different flavors. So I brought a little red curry. If I'm using curry, I do a little bit of cream on the top, and then I add some nuts. Now, I mentioned pecans, but when I'm using curry, to me, that brings up like a peanutty flavor. Like I kind of yearn for peanuts. So I also brought some diced peanuts. These are just crushed up peanuts, and they, to me, are a beautiful addition with curry. Now, if I'm not adding curry, or even if I am, you also could use different nuts. I mentioned in the list pecans. Toasting pecans is a beautiful flavor. Beautiful flavor. Now, if you're lucky enough to get to hang out in Pam's kitchen, Pam also candies pecans. They are absolutely spectacular. And if you want to bring out a little bit of sweet with your butternut squash, you could dust it with like cinnamon and add some candied pecans, and it completely changes the flavor. It's amazing how fast flavors can change just by subbing out a couple of ingredients. That's the coolest thing to me about soups in general. Soups like warm you from the inside out. They're literally food for your soul. And for me, they're the heart of a lot of what I do. So I love, love, love soup. But you can make one soup And if you make the basic recipe, you can freeze it in segments with different ingredients in it, just little toppings and spices that completely change the flavor profile. It's unbelievable how easy it is. You make one pot, and all of a sudden you can have meals that taste 4 completely different ways, which is part of the fun and what is part of what makes soup kind of great as something, even if you're living by yourself, you're single, or it's just you and your spouse, or you and you're raising a child. It makes it a really, really nice meal because you go through the effort of making one big pot and freeze it. A lot of soups freeze beautifully. And again, you can get all these different taste palettes. So let's go ahead and give our pan another stir. Jim's going to try and come over and take a look. So as your squash kind of starts to caramelize, it's going to start to get a little bit, now granted, like I said, I put a can of coconut milk in here already, which is why you're starting to see it look a little bit soggier than what yours is going to look like right now. But what you do want is you want that nice glaze kind of forming around it where it's starting to caramelize, because that's what's going to bring out the flavor. Okay. So now for everybody, as we haven't put in, and I'm going to put in more liquid too, because I added a second container of the butternut squash because I wanted to make a little bit bigger pan. So you're going to pick what is the liquid you want to add. There isn't a right or a wrong answer. So you decide, go with cream. If we go with cream, we're definitely going to add some bouillon. So we're going to go with 2 teaspoons of bouillon. We're going with 1.5 cups of cream. If we go with the coconut milk, depending on how large your pan is, you want to go with about 2/3 of the coconut milk. And again, we can do 2 teaspoons of the bouillon. And also, I mentioned you can also, instead of water, if you were going to use chicken stock or chicken broth, depends if it has no salt. If it has no salt, then you would use the bouillon. If it has salt in it, do not put bouillon in. Because one of the biggest things we do in the United States in general is we have a terrible, terrible, tragic time using way too much sodium. So let's not do that. We can add herbs, we can add all these different spices, but let's try and keep the salt a little bit lower and get our flavor in other areas. So pick which one you're going to do. And that's what we're going to do now. All right, I'm going with some cream. And of course, most of what you see here, a lot of what you see here is larger containers than what you used to buy, what you're used to buying at home. And that's fine. You all know I cook in a commercial kitchen. So most things I carry are larger quantities. So don't think, wait, my container doesn't look like that. That's weird. No. In fact, the fact that my container looks like this might be considered kind of weird. So we're going to go ahead and add some of our liquid. Add, if you had the bouillon, if you need the bouillon, adding about 1 cup. And we're going to cover it again. We're going to let that really now cook for another 10 or 15 minutes. We're not going to add any additional spice yet. Now, the things that we could add are garlic, but if you add bouillon, a lot of times bouillon has a lot of different spices in it. We could add the garlic. We could add adobo. Most of you know it's one of my absolute favorite ingredients. Again, it has some salt in it. So you will very rarely see me salt my food because I'm a big believer that most often there's enough salt in things. Now, don't get me wrong, a really good coarse salt on a really nice steak, if you like steak, is hard to beat. However, if we're going to use a lot of other seasonings, oftentimes there is salt included in them. So I veer away from it at that point in time. So we're going to let that cook down a little bit. We're going to stir it every kind of 5 or 6 minutes, just get it nice and softened. And again, I chose to do this because it was a very easy recipe and it really doesn't take a whole lot of time. I'm taking the time to make sure you know that there's so many options. And again, don't forget, you can ask questions anytime in the chat. You can put them in the chat. So we're going to go ahead and work on our salad. So I brought 2 different types of lettuce today. I brought wild arugula, which has a nice little kind of bite to it. It's not quite the same level of like a mustard green, which is a little bit spicier, but it does have a nice little like crunch, and it's a little bit bitter, a little bit. I love it, but there are some people that don't love it because they feel like it's a little bit too bitter for them. So my favorite summer lettuce, butter lettuce, sometimes people call it bib lettuce. These lettuce, we're lucky in Massachusetts, they grow in hothouses all across across Massachusetts. So we pretty much can get these year round, which is amazing. Butter lettuce is super light. And if you're going to make this as your salad or like kind of a light green salad, then what I would suggest doing is, it's amazing the kick you can give a very light salad just by making your own dressing. And people are like, oh my goodness, that sounds so hard. And it is so easy, so easy. So if you're gonna make a lettuce, make a salad with lettuce like this. Now again, you can add, you've seen me make salads where they have all the ingredients. I add in all the vegetables. I tend to like also a really simple salad when it accompanies things like a soup and bread. Because really, how does it get better than soup, salad, and crusty bread? So if you are using a lighter weight lettuce, a nice and light crisp lettuce, a lot of times what I will do is I will add a little bit of lemon juice, olive oil, extra virgin olive oil. So it's kind of a nice and light olive oil. You don't want a super pungent taste in this. I mix in a little bit of a touch. If you don't like things tart, maybe a little bit more of sugar. Or, by the way, honey. Sometimes people would rather use agave. I know if people are vegan, some people don't like to use honey. And I all of a sudden realized I lost my honey. I have it in the car. But honey is something I use in dressings all the time. I love using honey instead of processed sugar. So it's a bonus to do that. So I add just a little bit of honey, lemon. I add a little bit of olive oil and a touch of apple cider vinegar. Then a little bit of pepper, shake it up. To me, it's like the perfect dressing for a summer salad. One of my hands down favorite summer salads is just the lettuce. Sprinkle a little bit of grated cheese. Now I brought this because a couple of people asked us about vegan options. So I wanted to make sure I actually brought this, but this is actually a Whole Foods Market brand. It's 365, it's their generic brand, but it's the first time I actually had seen this, which is a plant-based Parmesan. So I tasted it earlier. It's a pretty nice flavor. It has that little bit of kind of bite to it that is nice. It's perfect for parm. So I would do the Boston lettuce, a little lemon, a little olive oil. If you're somebody who really likes vinegar, a little touch of vinegar, though with this lettuce, you don't necessarily have to have it. A little bit of black pepper or white pepper. these are the things we argue about in my kitchen. Black pepper or white pepper? I'm not gonna lie, I'm a white pepper fan. But the right hand in my kitchen, she detests white pepper, and will only use black and yells at me when I use white. So it's
Jeni,
one of those things, there really is a slight flavor difference. Yes, Tony.
we have a question in the chat about where you got that fava bean chickpea can mix, because the person has never seen that before.
Hmm. I think that I either got this at Stop and Shop or Market Basket. I think. I
And
don't
there you have it,
think
folks.
this is what happens when you buy food at all the stores because you're constantly looking for new products. And funny enough, this actually was one of my favorite things I found. I really like this combination. I really, really like this combination. But I'm not 100% sure which store I got it at. I think it was either Market Basket or Stop and Shop, but I'm not positive. But really, the only other one it could be would be Whole Foods Market. So, well, I suppose Trader Joe's, but I know I didn't get it at Trader Joe's. So there you go. Those are like all the stores. I mean, I shop at Star sometimes, Shaw's sometimes, but more rare. I definitely, I like a lot of the stuff that has a lot of the cans that have no salt added. I like things that are really pure. I tend to do organic when it comes to a lot of this type of thing. So it just, it's preference. But I think it was one of those two. All right, if you haven't stirred your pot recently, let's go ahead and give it a stir. Your squash should be breaking down a little bit. And if it's not softening, you probably need to turn it up a little bit. Checking my heat, I'm going to turn mine up a little bit. Because you want it at kind of a low simmer. You want to kind of start to soften the squash at low simmer. Okay, now we walked you through kind of the light greens. This is a salad I would make that I do make all the time in the summer. But in the fall, I tend to darken it up a little bit. So I brought arugula with me. So arugula it looks a little bit, honestly, like a dandelion leaf. A lot of people have said, like, Jeni, it looks like a weed. So, but to me, arugula is one of the best lettuces. I love it. I love it. Now, like I said, some people think arugula is a little bitter. I've heard that before. This is one of those things that's totally a taste preference. I love it. You might not. That's totally okay. So up against arugula, though, you can take a slightly more sweet or a slightly more acidic dressing. So for that, I have a rice wine vinegar that has a little bit of seasoning in it. So that is where it says wild and sweet. Isn't that what all of us want to be described as? Maybe a little bit wild and a little bit sweet. I think I would take it. I would take that. So my rice vinegar, let's start that again. My rice vinegar, oh, this is why we have glasses. I guess this is wishful thinking. So I just reread it. Clearly reading. It says mild and sweet. But who wants to be described as mild and sweet. I'm gonna stick with wild and sweet. I like it better. Forget it. I'm renaming it. Wild and sweet. So I'm going to get a little bowl and we're going to mix up a dressing. Like I said, I don't have the ability to whisk anymore with my right arm. So I'm actually going to use a NutriBullet. Again, this is one of those things that when you blend things, you can use an immersion blender, which I'm going to use for the soup, but I'm going to use the NutriBullet for the dressing. Now I'm going to bust out a little bit of Grey Poupon, Dijon mustard. Now Dijon mustard has a little bit of vinegar in it. All mustard has a little vinegar. But I am going to add a little bit more. Get a nice pop of flavor. All right. I am going to a little dish. I lost it. Oh, I don't need a dish because I got the NutriBullet. That's why. All right. So now, here's the cool thing with dressings. I'm going to tell you how I'm making this. However, just like with the choices we were discussing earlier, all of us have different flavor palettes. There's not a right or a wrong to what you should be doing. And part of the fun of cooking, and I know people sometimes say, oh my goodness, it's stressful. It's like, part of the fun is a little bit of trial and error. If you're not sure if you're gonna like something, start with a little less of the ingredient. You can always add more. The best rule of thumb I can tell you is you can't ever take something out. So instead of putting it all in, go light if you're not sure if you like it. Because if you're not positive and you go really light, and you go, I don't love it, you can likely kind of get over that and you can use other things to downgrade that flavor. But if you dump in a ton of it and you don't like it, it's going to be tough to overcome. So I went with a Grey Poupon. I'm going with my wild and sweet rice vinegar. That's going to be about maybe 2.5 tablespoons. And I'm going to put in a little bit of adobo. Can you open up, please? And perfect. These are the other reasons why it's good to have a producer on hand when your arm is bothering you and giving you a hard time. That's probably, I don't even think it's half a teaspoon, just a little bit of extra flavor. And you want for dressings, it is nice to have a nice light vinegar. This is actually a product of Greece, and it's an extra virgin olive oil. Obviously, Italy makes some beautiful olive oils as well. And if you don't have olive oil, if you don't like the flavor of olive oil, use canola oil. It's okay. We all have to kind of do what we have to do in order to make it work for us. I would not encourage you necessarily, if money is tight and you want efficiencies, you can do a lot of crossover on kind of how you use what you use. For this, honestly, the salad mixings, the onions, the nuts, you can use them for anything, you can use them for a ton of other things. I've never been a bigger fan of salad than when I basically run out of fingers to count the ingredients I just dumped into a bowl. So it's really nice for salad for me. Is like people are like, oh, salad, it's lettuce, maybe some cucumber, maybe some carrots. I'm like, no, it's that. It can be that, but you can add beets and artichokes and olives and beans. And I mean, it's just, the world is your oyster. You can add anything you want. It's so tasty. Of course, you can add cheese. That's always, Cheese makes the world a better place for me. I'm not gonna lie, it's hard. The idea of giving up cheese would be very difficult for me. Now, one of the cheeses I brought this evening, again, I showed you the plant-based parm, but also Gruyere, and we talked about Gruyere in one of my past episodes, is a great, really kind of stronger cheese that holds up really well. So that's one of the cheeses we used on our crusty bread when we did the class a little while ago, because then it was cheesy bread and we used a couple different cheeses and Gruyere was one of them, and amazing. A little bit of garlic, a little bit of Gruyere on toast. Toast points, amazing. Also makes a really good dipping bread. So back to our dressing. All I have in here is a little bit of the rice wine vinegar, my wild and sweet side. We have a little bit of the Dijon. We have a little bit of olive oil. We're going to do a little bit of pepper. And I put in a little bit of adobo. I'm going to mix that bad boy up. So now you can put it in a container and just shake it. You can use a whisk, which is something I can't do anymore, but you can take a whisk and beat it, and that totally will emulsify. Or if you know what you're doing, which, you know, it's questionable sometimes. Maybe not. He made it seem like the NutriBullet was so easy. Oh, maybe not. Oh, maybe I don't. Maybe I should plug it in. Jeesh. So you can see it almost looks like it's like a cream dressing. That's what happens when you emulsify something. Brings out the creaminess. So now, this is the only way to try a dressing is that you're making it, you got to try it. So if you're making it for a large group, you're not going to stick your finger in it because that is not kosher. So around me in my kitchen are a ton of what I call tasting spoons. I have containers of spoons that I literally dip in things to taste them to make sure the flavor is good. So that's what I do. I just put it on a spoon. I'm not trying to actually take a spoonful. It's just what sticks to the spoon. For me, I love this. It's tart. Now, for some people, I think they're going to want it sweeter though. So here I would add a little bit of honey, or if you have like a raw sugar, don't use a raw sugar in a dressing if you're not using something that really can emulsify it. It will break down eventually. The acid will break the sugar down, but it takes a little bit of time. So if you're going to use like a turbinado sugar and you're using it in like a shaker, get ready to get a workout because you need to actually get that sugar to disintegrate. And when you use that coarser sugars, it takes a little while. For me, this is just right. Now I'm going to put it aside. Now, crusty bread, pretty basic, but you can do any type of thing. Now Pam makes these beautiful little sandwiches called muffalettas from New Orleans. Amazing. So I'm using those rolls. The reason I'm using them is because when I'm serving a soup and a salad, it's kind of nice to use crusty bread, almost like a crouton. Now, obviously, if you're gluten-free, you don't want to use bread with gluten. I'm not going to lie, I'm not a fan of most gluten-free breads, but If you are gluten-free, only you can decide kind of what works. I am a huge fan of a ton of gluten-free crackers. Excuse me. And I would much rather actually crush up some of the gluten-free crackers and use that versus some of the breads. The breads have a little bit of a gummier feel to me that I don't enjoy. But again, total personal preference. I'm checking on our soup. It's cooking away here. All right. So I'm about ready to turn mine down and almost off. An easy way to test your squash, if it's ready, is all you have to do is put a fork through it. If a fork goes through easily, you know your squash is ready. So what we're going to do is we're going to get ready to mix it. So if you don't have a blender, you don't have anything, you can use a fork and kind of mash through it easily. That's fine. You're not going to get quite the same blended feel. And this is very much a texture thing. If you're somebody who likes like a creamy soup, throw it in a blender or use an immersion blender. But if you're somebody that likes chunks, then I would actually siphon a little bit of the actual squash out, kind of coarse mash it or chop it up and put it back in after you mash up the rest. So, all right, I'm gonna bring this over. Actually, I'm gonna put a little tray down first. I'm so excited I have my crunchy sage leaves. Oh, this is like one of those fall soups that just makes me so happy. So happy. Now remember, we have not overly spiced this. You can see my starting to stick a little bit at the bottom. Butternut squash is something that has natural sugar in it. When it has natural sugars, you see this often in carrots, in sweet potatoes. They can almost get like a glaze because their natural sugars can be brought out by cooking them. Churning through here a little. And then I'm gonna throw. And we're gonna taste it right after we get it blended to our preferred. A lot of people tell me, Jeni, it's so much harder to cook as I get older because I don't have the strength to do so many things. And this is one of those ways as a workaround. Now, I'm one of those people that kind of likes it a little chunky. So I'm not going to do a thorough. So, all right. So, again, this is one of those areas where everybody's preference is going to be a little different. But this is the most fun part of cooking. So now I use the coconut milk. So I have that little bit of a touch of coconut smell, which to me is divine. Oh, so good. So I'm going to add a little bit of adobo. And I'm gonna add a little bit of pepper. And for me, I think that's gonna do it. Now, I'm gonna get ready to put it in a dish, serve it in a little dish. I'm gonna serve it with a dollop, just a touch of cream on top and some nuts and some sprinkled, nicely buttered sage. So good. Go ahead. Let me see if I can steal it down. Oh, look, a perfect dish for plating a soup. It's almost like Pam cooks all the time. All right, let's see what we got here. Now again, I purposely did not make mine completely smooth. So we're going to do that. We're going to do just a touch of cream. We're going to take some of Pam's candied pecans and some of my crispy sage. And call it a day. Amazing. So again, for your salad, whichever way you decide to go, I was going with the arugula, a nice little honey mustard dressing with a little bit of bite because I don't like too sweet, and some toasty muffaletta. Now I keep my toasty breads simple when I do soups that have a lot of flavor in them. You can use a little butter, toast them, excuse me, or you can keep them totally plain. It's completely up to you. There are not a lot of rules that are required in cooking. It's what pleases your palate. But be bold, be brave, try new things. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. I hope to hear the reviews of your recipes that you made today. Maybe you can tell us some of the ingredients you decided to add on top of them, or what your favorites were. I will tell you, one of my other favorites is adding in the curry with the crushed peanuts on top. That also is a beautiful flavor. So from my kitchen, well, Pam's kitchen that she lets me use, which is so nice, and it's beautiful, to all of you, I hope you enjoyed tuning in tonight. We love to talk about nutritional literacy. Thank you to the Hyannis Public Library for hosting us. And thank you for joining me, Jeni Wheeler. I hope you come next month, 4th Tuesday of every month, and join us for what's going to be an amazing post-holiday meal. Thanks for joining us today, guys. You know what the secret ingredient is. It's always love. Have a great night.